The priest was waiting for my answer, but I was waiting for a message from the alpha I was never allowed to love. That was the cruelest part of standing beneath a cathedral ceiling painted with angels, surrounded by flowers chosen to look like purity, while my entire future depended on whether one small screen hidden inside my sleeve would finally light up. My name was Noah Bennett, 24 years old, Omega son of a family that had dressed its desperation in silk and called it tradition. I stood at the altar of St. Catherine's in downtown Boston wearing a white wedding suit that had been tailored to make me look graceful, obedient, and grateful. The fabric fit perfectly. Nothing else did. In front of me stood Julian Hart, the alpha I was supposed to marry before 300 guests, 2 powerful families, and a row of reporters waiting outside the iron gates. Julian looked every inch the perfect groom, tall, calm, handsome in a charcoal tuxedo with a white rose pinned above his heart. His dark blonde hair was brushed back, his jaw clean, his expression polite enough to satisfy everyone watching. Only I was close enough to see the truth in his eyes. He was not happy. He was trapped beside me, dressed beautifully for a life neither of us had chosen. The organ music still trembled through the old stone walls. White lilies climbed the columns. Candlelight softened every expensive lie. My father sat in the front pew with his hands folded over his cane, his smile thin and warning sharp enough to cut across the aisle. Victor Bennett had spent my entire life teaching me that a good Omega protected the family name, even if that meant surrendering his own. Today, I was not a son to him. I was a signature, a payment, a living promise that the Bennett scandal would disappear once the Hart fortune touched our ruined accounts. I kept my left hand still against my side, careful not to let anyone notice the phone tucked inside my sleeve. Before the ceremony began, I had sent one message to Adrian Cole. One final, foolish message to the alpha who had once promised to take me away from all of this. If forever ever meant anything to you, send me one reason not to say yes. That was all. No accusation, no begging, no explanation of how cold my hands were or how my heart had been beating like a trapped bird since dawn. I had stared at the screen until the wedding coordinator knocked on the door and told me it was time. No reply came. Now the priest smiled gently at me, unaware that every second of silence was burying another piece of hope. Julian's gaze flicked to my sleeve, then back to my face. He knew. Somehow, he knew I was waiting for someone else. My phone stayed dark. The priest opened his book. My father leaned forward, and I realized that if the screen did not glow before the vows reached me, I would become a husband before sunset and a ghost before morning. The priest's voice moved through the cathedral like soft water over stone, but every word sounded like a lock turning. Dearly beloved, he began, and the guests lowered their programs in perfect unison, 300 faces trained on Julian and me as if we were a painting they had already paid to admire. I knew what they saw. 2 old families joined beneath white lilies. A Bennett Omega rescued from scandal by a Hart alpha with enough wealth to make gossip polite again. A ceremony beautiful enough to make the newspapers forget the unpaid loans, the closed accounts, the whispered investigations, and the relatives who had stopped answering my mother's calls. They did not see the contract folded in my father's study drawer, signed 2 weeks earlier beside a glass of untouched bourbon. I had seen it only because the housekeeper left the door open while carrying in laundry, and I heard my name spoken in the same tone men use for property. The Hart family would settle the Bennett debts. My father would deliver a spotless wedding, a grateful son, and silence. My future had been discussed in percentages, timelines, and inheritance clauses. No one asked whether I loved Julian. No one asked whether Julian loved me. Love was treated like a decorative ribbon, pretty if available, unnecessary if the box was already sealed. I remembered standing in my father's study that night, the carpet thick beneath my bare feet, the fireplace burning too hot for late spring. Victor Bennett had not even looked ashamed when I asked if he had sold me. He only adjusted his cuff links and told me not to use dramatic language. Marriage has always been how families survive. Noah, he said, you should be honored that the Harts still consider you useful. Useful. The word had followed me into fittings, tastings, seating charts, and rehearsals. It had followed me that morning when a stylist pinned my pale hair neatly away from my face and said I looked timeless. It followed me now as I stood beside Julian beneath the cathedral lights, feeling less like a groom than a debt being paid in public. The wedding was perfect because perfection was the point. The lilies were imported. The cake stood 6 tiers high in the hotel ballroom across town. The guest favors were engraved silver card holders no one needed. Outside, reporters waited behind velvet ropes because a Bennett and Hart wedding still looked glamorous if no one looked too closely at why it had to happen so quickly. Julian shifted beside me, so slightly only I noticed. His hand brushed the cuff of his tuxedo, then stilled. His scent, usually polished amber and cedar, was pressed flat beneath restraint. He was performing just as carefully as I was. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man standing inside a roll tailored as tightly as his suit. His eyes moved toward the front pew, where his parents sat straight-backed and watchful. Then he looked at my sleeve again, where my phone remained dark and hidden. "You were waiting for him," Julian whispered, so quietly the priest did not pause. My throat tightened. I did not answer. Julian gave the smallest nod, not angry, not jealous, only unbearably tired. "Good," he said under his breath. "At least one of us still believes someone might come." Julian's whisper stayed with me long after the priest continued, quiet enough that no one else heard, sharp enough that I felt it under my ribs. At least one of us still believes someone might come. I wanted to tell him belief had nothing to do with it. Belief was something clean, something chosen. What I carried was older and more stubborn than belief. It was the echo of a promise made 2 years ago beneath a flickering bus station sign outside Boston, when Adrian Cole looked at me as if the world could burn behind us and he would still know the way forward. Back then, I had not known him as the powerful alpha people now whispered about in finance pages and private clubs. To me, Adrian was the man who waited outside the community arts center every Thursday night because he knew my father hated me taking painting classes, the man who brought hot chocolate in paper cups when the temperature dropped below 30 degrees, the man who listened when I spoke instead of deciding what my silence meant. He was 27 then, already serious, already guarded, but never cold with me. His scent was rain-washed cedar and black tea, steady enough to calm the panic I had carried since childhood. He never called me fragile. He never called me useful. He said my name like it belonged to me. We planned our escape in fragments because speaking too boldly made the dream feel easy to punish. I would pack one small bag. He would transfer enough money into an account my father could not touch. We would meet at the bus station in Newton just after midnight, take the first coach heading north, and disappear for a few days before deciding anything permanent. I remembered the way Adrian held my hands outside a closed bookstore the night before, his gloves rough against my fingers, his gray eyes bright with something that looked almost like fear. "I will be there, Noah," he said. "No matter what you hear, no matter what they say, wait for me." So I waited. I wore an old navy coat, the one with the loose button at the collar, and stood under the bus station awning while cold rain dotted the pavement. Every pair of headlights made my heart lift. Every stranger stepping down from a cab made it fall again. Midnight passed, then 12:30, then 1. My phone stayed in my hand until my fingers ached. At 1:14, the message arrived from Adrian's number. "Forget me, Noah. It is safer that way." I read it so many times the words lost meaning. I called once. No answer. I called again. Nothing. By sunrise, I went home with damp shoes, swollen eyes, and a heart that felt quietly removed from my chest. My father found me in the foyer and said nothing about where I had been. He only looked at my suitcase and smiled like a man who had already won. Now, standing at another threshold dressed in wedding white, I finally understood why that smile had haunted me. My phone was still dark, but the past was no longer silent. The priest's words faded behind the memory of my father's smile, and suddenly the cathedral felt less like a church than a stage built on top of that rainy bus station. I could still feel the damp wool of my old coat, the cold metal bench beneath my palm, the empty road where Adrian never appeared. For 2 years, I had carried that night like proof that love was another thing powerful men could promise and then abandon when it became inconvenient. But now, with Julian standing beside me and Victor Bennett watching from the front pew with that same satisfied curve to his mouth, the old story began to bend into a different shape. Adrian had told me to wait no matter what I heard. Then a message had arrived telling me to forget him. My father had known about the suitcase. My father had not asked where I had been. My father had smiled. The realization was not loud. It did not crash through me like thunder. It arrived quietly, with the terrible calm of a locked door opening from the wrong side. I lowered my gaze to my sleeve, where the hidden phone pressed against my wrist. Still dark. No vibración. No miracle. The last message I had sent before entering the cathedral sat unanswered somewhere in the invisible space between us. If forever ever meant anything to you, send me one reason not to say yes. I had typed it with my thumb shaking in the bridal room, while stylists adjusted my cuffs, and my mother cried silently into a lace handkerchief. Not because she objected, but because she had spent 25 years learning that objection changed nothing in the Bennett house. I had not expected Adrian to answer. Not really. Sending the message had been less an act of hope than a final wound I chose myself. A way to say I tried before the door closed forever. The priest turned a page. His voice warmed as he spoke about trust, devotion, and the courage to build a life together. Trust! I almost laughed, but the sound would have ruined the perfect picture. Julian leaned slightly closer, his face still forward for the guests. He asked me to stop waiting too, he whispered. My eyes moved to him. His jaw was tight, but his expression remained composed. Who did? My parents, he said. They said Daniel would lose his teaching position if I made a scene. They showed me a letter already drafted to the school board. Daniel. The name explained the sadness I'd seen behind Julian's polite smile. He was not just kind. He was grieving in formal wear. I looked at the alpha I was supposed to marry, and for the first time all day, he stopped being part of the cage. He became the person locked in the other half of it. Does he know you are here? I whispered. Julian swallowed. He knows. He asked me to choose myself. I was too afraid. The priest closed his book halfway, signaling the vows were near. My father's fingers tightened around the head of his cane. Julian's parents sat like judges carved from marble. My phone remained silent. But beside me, Julian let out a breath that sounded almost like surrender and almost like courage. Noah, he whispered, if your message comes, do not waste it. Julian's words should have comforted me, but they made the silence around my hidden phone feel even heavier. If your message comes, do not waste it. I looked at him from the corner of my eye, at the alpha everyone in the cathedral believed had won something by standing beside me. His charcoal tuxedo was flawless, his white rose perfectly pinned, his posture steady enough to satisfy every guest who expected strength from a heart. But his left hand was curled so tightly around nothing that his knuckles had gone pale. He was not waiting for my answer either. He was waiting for the moment his own life would vanish behind mine. The priest turned toward him first, and the cathedral settled into that polished, breathless stillness wealthy families mistake for dignity. Julian Hart, he said warmly, do you take Noah Bennett as your husband, to honor him, protect him, and build a life beside him from this day forward? The question hung between us like a glass ornament waiting to fall. Julian did not answer. 1 second passed, then 2, then 5. Somewhere in the front pew, his mother shifted sharply, the diamonds at her throat catching the candlelight. His father gave the smallest tilt of his chin, not enough for the cameras to notice, but enough for Julian to see. A command without words. I felt the pressure of it, as if it had been aimed at me. Julian stared at the priest, but his eyes were far away. Maybe he was seeing Daniel in Rhode Island, standing in some modest classroom with chalk dust on his sleeves, asking the man he loved to choose himself. Maybe he was hearing his parents tell him that love was charming in private and unacceptable in public. Maybe he was simply discovering that courage could arrive too late and still hurt. I wanted to tell him he did not have to do it. I wanted to tell him we could both step away before the entire room swallowed us whole. But my father was watching me, and Julian's parents were watching him, and the guests were watching us as if our misery had been printed on expensive paper and mailed weeks in advance. Julian finally drew a breath. His voice came out calm enough for the back row to believe him. "I do." The words entered the cathedral softly, but I felt them land like a door closing. Applause did not come. This was not that part of the ceremony. Only a small murmur of relief moved through the families, quick and private, like investors hearing good news. Julian looked at me then, and the kindness in his eyes nearly broke me. He had not said yes because he wanted me. He had said yes because he thought fear had already won. The priest turned toward me. "Noah Bennett," he began, and my father leaned forward before my name had fully left the priest's mouth. My phone stayed dark against my wrist. My pulse beat so loudly I could hear it over the organ's faint final note. The priest smiled. "Do you take Julian Hart as her husband?" I opened my mouth, but no answer came. Julian's gaze dropped to my sleeve one last time, and his expression changed. Not hope. Warning. The phone had begun to vibrate. The vibration was so small that no one in the cathedral should have noticed it, yet it felt like the whole world had shifted beneath my sleeve. My breath stopped halfway into my lungs. The priest waited with his kind, patient smile, one hand resting on the open book, expecting a simple answer that would make two families exhale. Julian saw everything. His eyes moved from my wrist to my face, and for one impossible second, he looked more relieved than afraid. My father did not understand yet. He only saw me hesitate. "Noah," he said from the front pew, soft enough to sound like concern and sharp enough to be a command. The guests shifted. A whisper passed through the rows like wind over dry leaves. I lower my hand very slowly, pretending to adjust the cuff of my white sleeve, and slip the phone into my palm. The screen lit up against my skin. Adrian Cole. My heart did not leap. It froze. For 2 years, I had imagined that name returning in dreams, in apologies, in impossible late-night calls I would never answer. I had not imagined it glowing in my hand while another alpha waited beside me, and my father watched from the front pew like a man guarding a locked gate. The message was short. "Your father sent that message 2 years ago. I never left you. Look at the church doors." The letters blurred, then sharpened. My fingers tightened around the phone until the edge pressed into my palm. The priest said my name again, uncertain now. Julian took one careful step closer, just enough to shield the phone from the nearest guests. "Is it him?" he whispered. I nodded, but I could not speak. My throat had closed around every version of myself that had waited in the rain, gone home alone, learned to breathe through grief, and almost said yes to a life built on a lie. I looked toward the front of the cathedral. Victor Bennett had gone very still. His smile was gone, replaced by something colder, something that told me the truth before any recording could. He knew. He had always known. The church doors at the back remained closed, tall and dark beneath the stained glass arch. For a moment, nothing happened. No grand entrance. No dramatic rescue. Just silence, candles, and 300 people watching an Omega fail to answer a question everyone thought had already been bought. Then the heavy doors trembled. A thin line of gray daylight appeared between them, followed by the scent of rain, cold air, and black tea over cedar. My knees almost gave way. Julian noticed and steadied me with one hand at my elbow, gentle and respectful, the way someone helps a person step out of fire they cannot see. The doors opened wider. Adrian stood at the threshold in a dark coat wet from the storm, his pale face drawn with exhaustion, his dark hair damp against his forehead, his gray eyes fixed only on me. He did not rush forward. He did not shout. He simply lifted his phone in one hand, and the cathedral speakers crackled to life as if someone near the entrance had connected the audio system for him. My father rose from the pew. "Stop this at once," he said. Adrian looked past him with a calm that made the room colder. "No, Mr. Bennett," he said. "You have spoken for Noah long enough." Then the recording began. The first sound from the speakers was rain. Not the rain falling outside the cathedral now, but the rain from 2 years ago, thin and cold against the car window, recorded beneath the low hum of an engine. Then my father's voice filled the church, polished and controlled. The same voice he used at charity dinners and family meetings when he wanted cruelty to sound like common sense. "You will not meet my son tonight, Mr. Cole." A wave of confusion moved through the guests, soft at first, then sharper as people began to understand that the past had entered the ceremony without permission. Adrian stood at the open doors with rain on his coat, his phone raised, his face pale but steady. He did not look like a savior from a fairy tale. He looked like a man who had carried evidence for too long and had finally found the only room large enough for the truth. His younger voice answered from the recording, strained but clear. "Noah is waiting for me. I gave him my word." My father laughed once, quietly. "Your word is not useful to me. His future is. I cannot move." Julian's hand remained near my elbow, not holding me in place, only reminding me that I was still standing. The recording continued. "If you take him tonight," Victor Bennett said, "his mother's treatment funds disappear before morning. Her hospital will receive notice that the family guarantee has been withdrawn. His scholarship will be questioned. His reputation will become a story before he has time to defend it." Adrian's voice came through lower, rougher. "You would ruin your own son to keep control of him?" "I would correct him," my father replied. "There's a difference." Somewhere near the front pew, my mother made a small broken sound, but she did not speak. My father stood rigid, his face stripped of the gentle authority he had worn for the ceremony. Around him, the elegant guests had become witnesses. Programs lowered. Phones rose. The Hart family stared at Julian as if willing him to step away from me, but Julian did not move. Then came the part that made my knees weaken. Victor Bennett said, "Send him a message from your phone. Tell him to forget you. Tell him it is safer. Make him believe leaving was your choice, or I will make certain his life collapses while he watches." The church blurred. For 2 years, I had hated 6 words because I thought Adrian had chosen them. "Forget me, Noah. Is safer that way." Now I heard the cage around those words. I heard the price placed on my mother's care, my education, my name, my future. I heard Adrian's silence after my father's demand, and for the first time, I understood that silence had not been emptiness. It had been terror wearing the shape of sacrifice. The recording ended with Adrian's voice, barely above a whisper. "If I do this, you leave him alone." My father answered, "If you do this well, he will leave himself alone." The speakers went quiet. No organ, no whispers, no rustle of silk. Just the heavy stillness of a room forced to look at the truth it had dressed in flowers. My father recovered first. "This is taken out of context," he said. His voice was firm, but the room no longer belonged to him. Adrian finally walked down the aisle, slow and careful, never taking his eyes off me. I did not run to him. Not yet. I turned to Julian first. He looked at me with sadness and relief braided together. "I'm sorry," I said. Julian gave a faint smile. "So am I." Then he faced the priest, the families, and every camera in the cathedral. "I withdraw my vow," he said clearly. "Not because Noah belongs to another alpha, but because neither of us belongs to anyone who had to threaten us into obedience." My father's cane tapped once against the marble. "Noah," he warned. I looked at him, at the man who had mistaken my softness for permission, and for the first time in my life, I did not lower my eyes. "No," I said. "One word. Small. Mine." Then I took the ring waiting on the velvet pillow, placed it gently on the altar, and stepped away from the life he had bought for me. For a few seconds, no one moved. The ring sat on the altar where I had placed it, a small circle of gold beneath a mountain of white flowers, and somehow it looked less like a symbol of marriage than a receipt returned to sender. My father stared at it, as if I had done something impossible by setting down what he had already decided was mine to carry. Then the room came alive all at once. Guests whispered. Cameras lifted higher. The priest stepped back from the altar with his book pressed to his chest, his face pale with the shock of a ceremony no prayer could repair. Julian's mother rose from the front pew, her voice trembling with polished anger as she said his name. Julian did not answer her. He removed the white rose from his lapel, looked at it for one quiet moment, then placed it beside my ring. "I am sorry," he said, but not to her. He said it to himself, to Daniel, to the person he had almost buried beneath obedience. Across the aisle, Adrian stopped several feet away from me. Rainwater clung to the hem of his dark coat, and his gray eyes held so much regret that I almost looked away. He did not reach for me. He did not ask me to come to him. That hurt in a different way, because it was the first choice he had given me without fear wrapped around it. My father stepped into the aisle before I could speak. "Noah, listen to me," he said, lowering his voice into the tone he used when he wanted control to sound like protection. "You're overwhelmed. This man has manipulated an emotional moment. Come with me, and we will settle this privately." Privately. That word nearly made me laugh. My whole life had been settled privately. My classes, my friendships, my clothes, my future, my grief. Every wound had been handled behind closed doors, so the Bennett name could remain clean in public. I looked at my mother. She was crying silently, one hand over her mouth, but for the first time, she was not looking at my father. She was looking at me like she was finally seeing the son she had been too afraid to defend. I took a breath. "No," I said again, louder this time. "I am done being private when the lie was public." The words changed the air. They were not dramatic, not elegant, but they belonged to me. Julian turned toward his parents. "Daniel should not lose his job because I refuse to marry someone I do not love," he said, his voice steady now. "If any letter reaches that school board, I will release every message you sent me about this arrangement." His parents went still. The Hart family silence felt different from the Bennett silence. Not powerful, only exposed. Adrian looked at Julian with quiet respect, then back at me. "Noah," he said softly, "I came because you asked for one reason. I brought the truth, but I will not ask you to choose me in front of them." I closed my eyes for one heartbeat, and in the darkness I saw the bus station, the rain, the message, the years I had spent mistaking abandonment for fact. When I opened them, I was still afraid, but fear was no longer the largest thing in me. I walked past my father. He did not touch me. Maybe he finally understood that every camera in the cathedral was watching. Maybe he understood that I would not stop even if they were not. I stopped in front of Adrian, close enough to smell rain, cedar, and black tea. "I am not leaving this altar because you came back," I said. His face tightened, accepting the pain without defense. "I know. I am leaving because I should never have been sold." Then, and only then, I took his hand. The cathedral doors stood open behind him, letting in gray daylight and cold Boston air. Together, with Julian walking beside us instead of behind us, we left the altar while every beautiful lie collapsed under the sound of our footsteps. The moment we crossed the threshold, the sound of the cathedral changed behind us. Inside, the guests were still whispering, still reaching for their phones, still trying to decide whether they had witnessed a ruined wedding or the first honest thing that room had held all day. Outside, Boston waited in cold rain. Reporters turned from the iron gates almost at once, their cameras rising like a sudden field of black glass. They had arrived expecting a picture of two old families smiling beneath umbrellas. Instead, they saw me in a white wedding suit, Julian without his boutonniere, and Adrian Cole holding my hand as if he had spent 2 years learning how not to let go. Questions flew toward us from every direction. "Mr. Hart, is the wedding canceled?" "Mr. Cole, why were you inside?" "Noah, who sent the recording?" I flinched when I heard my name from strangers, but Adrian did not pull me faster. He slowed instead, matching my steps, letting me decide whether to move or stop. That small mercy almost undid me. Julian stepped forward first, his expression calm in a way that made him look older than he had at the altar. "The wedding is canceled," he said. "No one here was abandoned. No one here was stolen. We are leaving because the truth came out before a contract could become a life." His voice carried clearly through the rain, and for one breath, even the reporters quieted. Then Adrian looked at me. "You do not have to speak," he said softly. I knew that. I also knew silence had been chosen for me too many times. I released his hand, not because I wanted distance, but because I wanted the next words to stand on their own. My fingers were cold. My heart was not. "My name is Noah Bennett," I said, and the microphones turned toward me. I was brought to that altar because my family believed my future could be traded for money and reputation. I was told obedience was love and silence was dignity. Today I learned both were lies. I looked back through the open cathedral doors, where my father stood in the shadows between candles and white flowers. For the first time, he looked smaller than the name he had used to frighten me. I am not choosing a man because he returned, I continued. I am choosing a life where no one gets to decide my worth for me. The rain softened the edges of the city. Somewhere behind us, Julian let out a breath that sounded almost like freedom. Adrian stood beside me without speaking, his presence steady but not possessive. When the questions began again, louder this time, a black car pulled up to the curb, sent by someone Adrian trusted. Julian checked his phone, and his face changed when he saw a message. "Daniel?" I asked. He nodded, smiling for the first time that day without sadness. "He is outside his school, waiting." "Then go," I said. He looked at me as if he wanted to apologize again, but there was nothing left to apologize for. Julian stepped into another waiting car, not as my almost husband, but as a man finally going toward the person he loved. Adrian and I climbed into the black car together. The cathedral disappeared behind wet glass, its bells silent now, its flowers left to witness the ending of a lie. For a while, neither of us spoke. My phone buzzed again and again in my lap. Messages, headlines, missed calls, the whole city trying to enter the space between my hands. One alert flashed across the screen before I could turn it over. Bennett Omega leaves altar after secret recording exposes family deal. I stared at it until the words became less frightening. Adrian sat beside me, close enough for warmth, far enough for choice. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. 2 years ago, I would have said anywhere with you. Today, I looked at the rain sliding down the window and answered differently. Somewhere no one is waiting to own me. Adrian nodded. By sunrise, Boston would know my name. But for the first time in my life, so would I. Adrian did not take me to one of the hotels where my father's friends would know the concierge by name, or to a penthouse with glass walls and security guards who would look at me like a problem in borrowed wedding clothes. He gave the driver an address in Cambridge, then looked at me as if waiting for me to object. The car moved through rain-slick streets, past coffee shops, brick apartment buildings, and students hurrying under umbrellas, and with every mile between us and the cathedral, my breathing became a little more my own. The place was a small brownstone near Harvard Square, narrow and old, with warm light in the windows and ivy climbing one side like it had survived every season by refusing to let go. A woman opened the door before Adrian could knock. She was in her early 40s, with silver-streaked dark hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the calm expression of someone who had seen powerful families panic before breakfast. "This is Marissa Vale," Adrian said. "My attorney. My friend." Marissa looked at my white wedding suit, my damp hair, and the phone clutched in my hand. Then she stepped aside. "Come in, Noah. No one enters this house without your permission tonight." Those words nearly broke me more than any threat had. Inside, the brownstone smelled like coffee, old books, and lemon furniture polish. It was not grand, but it felt solid, the way libraries feel solid, as if walls could hold secrets without using them against you. Marissa brought towels and tea. Adrian stayed near the doorway until I looked at him and said, "You can sit down." Only then did he take the chair across from me, not beside me, not too close, giving the space between us a respect I did not know I needed until I had it. Marissa placed a legal pad on the table. "I have the recording," she said. "I have a copy of the message you received today, and Adrian has already forwarded the original file metadata. Noah, I need to ask what you want to do next. Not what he wants. Not what your father fears. You." The question felt impossible. All day, people had asked whether I would say yes, where I would stand, who I would belong to. No one had asked what I wanted after the altar ended. I looked down at my hands. The sleeve of my wedding suit was stained faintly with rain. "I want my mother safe," I said. "I want Daniel safe. I want Julian protected if he speaks. I want my father to stop using private fear as public power." Marissa wrote each sentence carefully. Then she looked up. "And Adrian?" Adrian went still. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "I do not know yet," I said. His face tightened, but he nodded without defending himself. "That answer is fair." It was the first fair thing between us in 2 years. My phone buzzed again on the table, and all three of us looked down. A message from my mother appeared. "I am sorry. I should have protected you." I covered my mouth with one hand, not to hide tears, but to keep the sound inside me from escaping too quickly. Adrian did not reach for me. Marissa did not speak. For once, the room let me feel something without demanding that I explain it. Outside, rain blurred the Cambridge windows, and somewhere across the city, my father was probably rewriting the story already. But this time, he would not be the only one with a pen. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving Cambridge shining under streetlights, as if the whole city had been rinsed clean for a truth it was not ready to hear. Marissa moved through her brownstone with quiet efficiency, making calls from the kitchen, sending documents from her laptop, and speaking to reporters in a voice so calm it made panic sound unnecessary. I sat at the dining table with a mug of tea cooling between my hands, still dressed in the white suit that no longer felt like wedding clothing. It felt like evidence. Adrian remained across from me, close enough to answer questions, far enough not to crowd the space I had finally claimed. Every few minutes, his phone lit up with messages from people who had ignored him for years and suddenly wanted to know where he stood. He ignored most of them. When he did answer, he asked me first. That should have been a small thing. It was not. Julian arrived just after 7 with Daniel beside him, both of them damp from the sidewalk and visibly nervous. Daniel was exactly the kind of man the Hart family would call unsuitable because he looked too honest to be useful. He wore a brown cardigan under a raincoat, his glasses slightly fogged, one hand wrapped around Julian's as if he had no intention of letting shame enter the room with them. When Julian saw me, guilt crossed his face again. I stood before he could apologize. "We survived the same altar," I said. "That is enough." His shoulders loosened, and Daniel gave me a grateful look that nearly made me cry. Then my mother came. She did not arrive like a Bennett wife, polished and silent behind my father's shadow. She came alone in a gray coat, with no driver and no pearls, her eyes red but clear. For a moment, neither of us moved. I had spent years being angry at her silence, then angry at myself for needing her anyway. She stopped in the doorway of Marissa's dining room and said, "I cannot undo what I allowed. I can only tell the truth now, if you will let me." I want to be hard. I wanted to tell her that truth should have come sooner, that mothers were supposed to stand between their children and men like my father. But her hands were shaking, and mine were too. So I said, "Then tell it." She placed a folder on the table. Inside were hospital letters, bank notices, and emails from my father to the Hart family, each one proving that my marriage had been treated like collateral long before anyone asked me to choose a suit. Marissa read in silence, then looked at all of us. "We release one statement tonight," she said. "Together. No speculation, no private heartbreak, only proof." Adrian's gaze found mine. "Are you ready for that?" I looked at my mother, at Julian and Daniel, at the alpha I had loved and not yet forgiven, and at the life waiting beyond my father's reach. "No," I said, "but I am ready to stop being afraid of my own name." Marissa opened her laptop. Outside the window, cameras were already gathering beneath the streetlights. Marissa did not let us step outside until every sentence had been weighed like evidence. The statement was short, but it carried the weight of all the years our families had spent teaching us that silence was safer than truth. My mother confirmed that the Bennett finances had been used to pressure me into marriage. Julian confirmed that the Hart family had threatened Daniel's teaching career if he refused the arrangement. Adrian confirmed that my father had forced him to send the message that separated us 2 years ago. I confirmed the only thing that mattered most. I had not consented to a marriage built from threats, debt, and fear. When Marissa finally opened the front door, cold evening air rushed into the brownstone, and the camera lights outside flashed so suddenly that I almost stepped back. Adrian noticed, but he did not touch me. He only lowered his voice and said, "You decide where to stand." So I did. I stepped onto the top stair with my mother on one side and Julian on the other. Daniel stood beside Julian, pale but steady, their hands joined in plain sight. Adrian stood a few feet away, close enough to support me, far enough for the world to understand that this moment was not about being claimed by another alpha. It was about being heard. The reporters called my name, Julian's name, Adrian's name, my father's name. Questions tangled over one another until Marissa lifted one hand, and somehow the noise settled. She spoke first, explaining that documents and recordings had been provided to legal counsel and would be released through the proper channels. Then she stepped aside. My mother faced the cameras. Her voice shook, but it did not break. "I failed my son by confusing survival with obedience," she said. "I allowed fear of my husband and fear of scandal to silence me when no one needed protection. That silence ends tonight." The flashes came again. I looked at her and felt something inside me loosen. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the first breath after years underwater. Julian spoke next. He did not mention family legacy or public duty. He spoke of Daniel, of being told that love without status was weakness, of almost accepting a future that would have harmed all of us. Then Adrian stepped forward. He did not make excuses. He did not turn sacrifice into heroism. He only said, "I made a choice 2 years ago because I believed silence would protect Noah. I was wrong. Protection without truth becomes another cage. I am here now to support his voice, not replace it." When it was my turn, the microphone seemed impossibly close, like black flowers blooming in the cold. I thought of the altar, the bus station, the unanswered years, the ring I had left behind beneath white lilies. "My name is Noah Bennett," I said. "Today I walked away from a wedding, but I am not ashamed. I walked away because a family name is not worth more than a person's freedom. I walked away because love cannot grow where fear signs the contract. I walked away because I belong to myself first." For once, the silence after my words did not feel like punishment. It felt like space. Then, from somewhere beyond the cameras, a reporter shouted that Victor Bennett had just resigned from the family board pending investigation. My mother closed her eyes. Julian exhaled. Adrian looked at me, and I realized the world had changed while I was speaking. Not completely, not safely, but enough for the door behind me to remain open, and the cage in front of me to lose its lock. 4 weeks after that night, my name appeared in places I had never wanted to see it, on news sites, legal summaries, social media threads, and whispered conversations in cafes where strangers thought they understood a life because they had watched 30 seconds of it on a screen. At first, I hated it. I hated the way people called me brave when I still woke before dawn with my heart racing. I hated the way they turned Adrian into a tragic alpha, Julian into a noble groom, my mother into a redeemed wife, and me into a symbol polished smooth enough to forget I was still learning how to stand without shaking. But time did what it always does when no one is allowed to own it. It moved forward. My father lost the board seat he loved more than his family, and the investigations that followed stripped the Bennett name of the shine he had spent decades protecting. My mother moved into a small apartment near the Charles River, where she learned to make coffee too strong and answer her own phone. Julian left Boston for Rhode Island, where Daniel taught 3rd grade and kept a small garden behind their rented house. The first picture Julian sent me was not romantic or dramatic. It was a crooked row of tomato plants and his hand in Daniel's, both of them covered in dirt. I saved it because it looked like peace. Adrian stayed, but not in the way my younger self would have imagined. He did not arrive with grand promises or ask me to turn forgiveness into a finish line. He came to therapy with me when I asked, waited outside when I did not, learned the quiet language of asking before helping, and accepted every boundary as if it were a gift instead of a punishment. Some days I missed him so sharply it frightened me. Some days I could not look at him without remembering the bus station. Both things were true. Healing did not erase contradiction. It taught me that love worth keeping had to survive honesty, not replace it. 6 months later, I went back to St. Catherine's alone. The cathedral was empty except for an elderly groundskeeper arranging candles near the side chapel. There were no cameras, no lilies imported for a contract, no guests waiting to judge whether I obeyed beautifully enough. I stood at the altar where my old life had ended and felt no triumph, only a strange tenderness for the version of me who had nearly disappeared there. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Adrian had texted from the front steps. "Take your time." I smiled because he meant it. When I walked outside, He was waiting in the cold afternoon light with 2 paper cups of hot chocolate, the same kind he used to bring me outside the art center years before. He offered one without touching my hand. I took it, and then I took his hand too. We walked toward Boston Common without making promises large enough to frighten either of us. The trees were bare, the air smelled like snow, and the city moved around us as if nothing sacred had happened. Maybe that was the lesson. Freedom did not always arrive with bells or headlines. Sometimes it arrived as a quiet sidewalk, a warm cup, an unanswered future, and the simple knowledge that if a message ever came again, I would not wait for permission to choose myself.